Hey everybody, productivity. Productivity, very important aspect. Also competition. Productivity relates to competition. The more productive you are, the more competitive you are. And it's like going up and down a stairs. Productivity is the driver that fuels so much within an organization. If you can concentrate on productivity, very similar to efficiency, but if you can concentrate on productivity, you can greatly enhance the position of your organization within its industry, and employees benefit considerably as a result of working for a productive organization. So productivity is not as well known as efficiency and effectiveness. We'll define all three. It's not as well known, but the impact can be greater. Why is that? Let's get into it. Let's talk about productivity and competition. I'm Dean Gualco. Great to have you here. Here's our agenda. What is productivity? The impacts of productivity. The impact of productivity is so important, I've included it twice here. So we're going to talk about the impact, maybe twice as long as any others. And we're going to talk about how to raise productivity. There's some other aspects we'll talk about as well. It's a fairly brief presentation. As you know, with these presentations, I only try to include the most important information, the information that you need the most in order to get the best. That's what we hope to concentrate on. First, a quote. This is from Tim Ferriss. And he says, and what's interesting, as you know, is I don't like to use quotes from other people. I tend to try to keep the quotes with people that we know. That being said, this is a pretty good quote from Tim, and it says, focus on being productive instead of busy. Focus on being productive instead of busy. So what does Tim mean in relation to focus on being productive instead of busy? Of course, I haven't talked to Tim, but I think I can interpret what he means. There's people who are quite busy, but are they getting anything done? Are they getting it done as well as they could? So when you go into an organization, I'll share some examples. When you go into an organization and they have a lot of reports to do, most people will do the reports, but they don't particularly ask, well, what should occur with these reports? What should I do with these reports? That's even most importantly. One time for some years, I ran a library, and I remember these reports that we had to do on a fairly regular basis. And I asked one time, what happens with these reports? Oh, they go to City Hall, or they go to the county, or even the state. And what do they do with it? Funny thing you ask. I really never know what they do with them. Well, you end up finding out that they actually file those reports. And they file those reports, and you ask yourself, well then, should they be done? Is there something valuable that comes from those reports? And you soon find out, not really. Not much really happens with those reports. Then you have to work on, well, what can we do to not do those reports anymore? That is what productivity is. If I'm going to do the work, rather than just looking busy, I want to make sure that there's a consequence of doing that work. The consequence should be valuable, important. It should lead to greater efficiencies and effectiveness. It should lead to, of course, better performance. Better performance leads to better productivity. Better productivity leads to greater profitability. Even for those organizations like the library that may not work or may not function on a cash basis or a profit and loss basis, you hope that if you're more productive, even more profitable, you can use the remaining monies in a much more beneficial way for the community. So productivity is important, but it's what we do in order to be productive. It's how we restructure, reformat, re-engineer our processes that is going to result in an increase in productivity. So, what is productivity? What's this concept that we call that is productivity? How do we interpret and reinterpret this concept of productivity? Well, productivity is concerned with the best resources. It's using your resources in the best way possible. Remember I talked about efficiency and effectiveness? I said, well, what's efficient and what's effective? Well, efficiency and effectiveness are similar to productivity, and we can often say that it's a result of productivity, but it's also productivity results in efficiency and effectiveness. So they're all related. So let's start with effectiveness. Effectiveness means that it works. What works? Well, often means that you're more productive and efficient. So we'll go back to efficiency. Efficiency is using the least amount of resources possible. Again, the least amount of resources. That's what efficiency is. Example I often use is building a car. If you build a car and you use the least amount of steel, that's efficient. If you use the least amount of rubber in the tires, that's efficient. Effective is the consequence. Does it work? The best 3 words you can use is, does it work? Yes, you're efficient. Yes, you use the least amount of steel. Yes, you use the least amount of rubber. But does it result in a better car? A car that sells? So, efficiency is using the least amount of resources. Effectiveness is using them in a manner where the product or service that you create works best. So maybe you have to add more steel, maybe a little less efficient, add more steel so that the end result is people want to buy your car. That's effectiveness. So, we've learned about efficiency, and we also learned about effectiveness. So what is productivity? Productivity is concerned with using the best use of the resources that we have. And a good example would be employees. And productivity is getting the most out of the employees that you have. Efficiency is using less employees. So they're similar, but a bit dissimilar. People use the word efficiency and productivity in the same. But you hope that if you are efficient, use the least number of resources, and you are effective, which means you use those resources and the product or service still works, that you are productive, which means in totality you're using all your resources to the best possible use. Can you be productive, which results in being more efficient? Of course. You can raise your productivity, which means that you raise the amount of products or services that you're making with the same level of employees, but then you realize we don't need as many employees because maybe we don't need as many products. So our hope is that as we become more productive, we can also be more efficient. We can sort of reduce the resources we need. We don't need as many resources to create and produce the same level of products and services. So all 3 are very much related, and it really is about trying to figure out how to make something with the least amount of inputs. It's really what it's all about. If you can spend less money to make a product, and maybe you can sell it for the same price, if you can spend less to make the product, you make more money. So efficiency and productivity are related in regards to using the efficiencies of their resources, their inputs, in order that when you create an output, you make more money from it. So a great example is if I can use 2 employees to create 10 widgets, but now I figured out a way to make those employees work better, smarter, faster, whatever it may be, and those 2 employees now make 20 widgets, I've doubled my productivity. Very simple example. Same number of employees. I've taught them better processes. I taught them to work better, whatever it may be, and I have doubled their output. Productivity is doubled. But maybe I can't sell 20 widgets. So now, instead of having 2 employees make 2 widgets, I now have 2 employees making 20 widgets, but I still can only sell 10 widgets. So what am I going to do? I'm going to reduce the number of employees. That is not only productive, because I'm getting the best value out of the employees I have, but it's also efficient because now I can reduce the number of employees. The holy ambition of a person who works in an organization is to be as productive as possible. If you are as productive as possible, you have a great chance of keeping your job. If organizations only employ people who are productive, then the organization is going to use their resources efficiently and effectively, and they're going to be more profitable because of greater performance. But we should not, as we'll talk about in a couple of slides, we should not forget that organizations that become more productive often use less resources. It's not just that they use their resources best, but they tend to produce more, and since they produce more, they maybe need fewer resources, in this case, employees. And so as productivity increases, you don't need to have as many employees, or you don't need to add as many employees. That's why when you have a tremendously productive workplace, the employment tends to either be static or goes down. From a countrywide perspective, if you have an increasingly productive workforce, you don't add as many jobs because people are making more widgets, in this case, on a continual basis. Productivity is also very concerned with statistics. We'll talk more about that. But it's really the ratios between inputs and outputs, outputs and inputs. If you have fewer inputs and greater outputs, that's a productive organization. If you have fewer outputs, then you're going to have to reduce your inputs. That stands to reason. Our goal is always this exchange and interrelationship between inputs and outputs. It's the same with anything that we do in our personal lives, or most things. You want to study less for a test, but certainly make a higher grade. So you want to be productive. You want to use your term and your time productively. How can I study less but get the same or better grade? Well, I'm going to maximize my studying processes and procedures. Instead of, for instance, having a TV or radio on, I'm going to eliminate that distraction and concentrate when I study. As a result, I'm going to use the same amount of time, but I'm going to get a higher grade. That is productivity. That's our goal in relation to productivity. Same time, but we get more out of the time that we have allotted for this particular occasion. It's a better use of inputs, and that can maximize our outputs. That, hopefully, is a good example of what productivity is. But did you know that productivity involves measurements? We talked about statistics. That's a measurement. So much of what we do in relation to productivity is about this aspect that we call measurements. What do we know from measurements? What can we learn from measurements? It's an interesting concept. It's very statistically based. We use quite a bit of statistics in relation to productivity. Ratios, as we mentioned. Did you also know that services are more challenging to measure than products? Why is that? Why would we say that services are more challenging than products? Because products are quantitatively based, statistically. You can count the number of widgets that are made. You can't necessarily count how long somebody is thinking when they're doing your taxes. Yeah, you can do a time basis, and attorneys usually charge by the quarter hour, so that can be somewhat about productivity. But when you use the mind, it's more difficult to determine how to be productive and to raise the level of productivity, as an example. You really can't tell somebody, you need to think faster. You need to think better. You can change the circumstances in their environment, for instance, turning off the TV or radio. But as far as how long it may take for somebody to generate an idea, that can be a bit more challenging. Not impossible, but more challenging. Those that provide services that can provide those services in a more expedited manner, they're more productive. Can you teach somebody to think quicker? There's some strategies that you can use. However, it is more challenging than teaching somebody to make a widget or making more widgets. There are factors, did you know, that do impact productivity. That's certainly intuitive. And we'll talk at the end of this presentation about how we can be more productive in our workplace. Factors that impact productivity include investment, which means money. Widgets. If you can train somebody to make widgets better or faster, then that training costs money. You may have to bring in a consultant or contractor to do that. So money is important to raise productivity. Ideas and imagination. I've long said that the singular trait that distinguishes a star employee from a superstar employee, or even in the future from an unemployed employee, is, yes, ideas, imagination. Computers and robots and artificial intelligence cannot think like a human can. So the one aspect that differentiates a human from an inhuman is this idea, this imagination that envelops their mind. Those employees that can develop their mind in a way that far exceeds nearly anyone else are those that are going to be employed in the future. So productivity rises by a person saying, have you ever wondered why? Or did you ever think about? It's very similar to Google. And we'll give some examples of companies as we go through this presentation. Google's ranked as the #2 company by Forbes in terms of the most valuable brands. Most people shouldn't be surprised about that. But Google believes in a couple of things. One is they believe that you really can't hire somebody who's unmotivated and motivate them. So in their hiring process, they really look for, is there someone that we can tell is motivated, motivated to do the job? Motivation, as we know, is an internal response. We really can't motivate somebody else. We can only provide the tools so they can motivate themselves. Google looks for employees who are motivated to be better, to do better, to create something different. They want somebody who's motivated. Then they're going to put them in an environment that's going to enhance that motivation. What does Google do? They do kind of two things. One is that they're quite famous for the amount of free products and services that they provide to their employees. From free meals to free dry cleaning. They give you sleep pods in order if you want to take a nap. And they also have on-site physicians. Pretty amazing. That way no one has to leave the workplace. So they provide a host of these benefits to employees. The other thing they do is they use measurements, which is what we talked about on this slide, statistics. They found that if people spend too much time in line for lunch, that they lose productivity. However, if they spend no time in line for lunch, then they don't interact with their colleagues, and that interaction is where ideas are generated. So they found out that the ideal time for somebody to stand in line for lunch is 4 to 5 minutes. So if you go to Google, you're going to stand in a line for lunch for about 4 to 5 minutes. Amazing, right? That's what productivity is. It's about measurements and results. Technology, of course, is one that we have seen greatly enhances productivity. I've used examples of McDonald's fries for years. If you were to buy fries in the 1960s, they probably would have had to cut them somewhat by hand or a modified machine, and then they would have to blanch them and then fry them. And it was a very labor-intensive type of operation. One reason why in the 1960s, if you compared the 1960s to today, the average McDonald's has half or less the number of employees than in the 1960s. They're much more productive today. Fries is one example. Now, fries from when they're harvested as a potato to actually entering into the McDonald's franchise, the number of steps that it takes to convert that potato into a fry has been drastically reduced, drastically enhanced through automation, so that many fewer employees have to touch that potato before it becomes a fry. Technology has greatly added in this transformation. And that's really what technology is. It's the transformation of an input into an output. Very similar, of course, to productivity. Management and employees, what you find is that management and employees that are the most productive are those that continually assess and reassess the way work is done, and then figure out a way to do the work better. It does take managers to create this environment that says, look at everything you do and look for a way to do it better, or even, do you need to do it anymore? And that comes from employees who are motivated, i.e. Google, to do their job well. Apple's another example. Apple, a competitor of Google and others. Apple had the highest net income of only just a couple years ago. They have a brand that is certainly recognized worldwide, but I would say admired as well. There's a person by the name of Michael Mankins, and he studied Apple for some time, and he found out that Apple felt that the people are critical. Certain people are critical, but people in general. And an example of this is when Apple and Microsoft some years ago were creating their operating system. It took Microsoft 5 years and about 10,000 employees to create their operating system. Apple, it took them 2 years and only 600 employees. The result, some say, is a superior Apple product. However, according to Michael Mankins, they were much less productive. As far as profitable, Apple was more profitable because they used their people better, they used their investment better, they used their resources better. So there's some examples of Apple and Google as far as productivity. And lastly, processes and procedures. We talked about this in relation to management and employees. You have to constantly assess and reassess the processes that you make. Productivity is about processes. Processes are boring, right? Procedures are boring. But the hope is that you find out a way that works to make a product or service, and you use that process because it's more efficient and effective and raises productivity in the end. Kind of an interesting type of aspect in relation to productivity, but the impacts are tremendous. What do we mean by when we talk about the impacts of productivity? Why should we concentrate so much on productivity? First of all, it lowers product cost. It makes sense that it lowers product cost. Why does it lower product cost? Because, as mentioned earlier, if you can make more products, then each product that a person makes costs less. If a person makes 10 widgets, it's then maybe $1 a widget. If they make 20 widgets in the same amount of time, then it's only 50 cents per widget. Lowers product cost. Stronger competitive position. If an organization can make more widgets per person, they have more to sell. They can even lower the price of the widgets that they made. If they can lower the price of the widgets and other people aren't as productive and their prices are higher, then that organization that raises its productivity and lowers its prices can more dominate the market. These revenues, because they make more products, these more revenues result in more profits. More profits, as we say here, can result not only in more money for the organization, more investment for something later, but it can also result in more funds, more salaries, more bonuses, more incentives for the employees. Especially if you're paid by what's called a piecemeal basis, which means the more you produce, the more you make. You want to be more productive because you make more money. It results in a sense of job security for employees who stay, because if you work at an organization that is more productive, which means you do make more products, and if you make more products, it's cheaper per product, then you can lower your price, you can gain market share, you can gain revenues, and therefore gain profits. For the employees there, it offers a sense of job security. However, you may also need fewer employees as a result of being more productive. Some employees may lose their job. The hope, of course, is that as you make more product, you can sell more product and everybody keeps their job. It does mean, though, that you're not going to hire more people because you're getting more value out of the people that you have, so you don't need to hire more employees on a continual basis. Those countries that are more productive are seen as having a higher standard of living. You're making more as a country from your resources, i.e. your people. And a good example is the widgets. If you made 10 widgets with your employees, but you figured out a way to be more productive and now you make 20 widgets, you now have 10 additional widgets to sell throughout the country. And if it's TVs or something that people want, you can see that you now have more products within your world. It's a greater standard of living. Also, when you have more products, it's often cheaper. So those who couldn't afford a TV that you bought now may be able to afford that TV, and their standard of living has increased. And that leads us to really the last slide about how to raise productivity. I try to keep on these presentations to 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these. I try to keep it very short and to the point so that we can remember these. How to raise productivity? Research, research, research. Benchmark against the competition. Find out what does work, what does not work, what could work, what may work. Figure out what an organization can find out about raising productivity. You can borrow, certainly not steal, but borrow from other organizations if you can. If the information is in the public domain, you can certainly utilize that. But you want to go out and research about how people have become more productive in their workplace, and then adapt to that if you can into your own. This will raise your competitive position within the organization, which is an important aspect to consider. Second is use technology. We mentioned about the French fries, about converting the potato into the French fry. Do we really need employees anymore when we rely more on technology? The fact is, employees have become a bit more, as we say, a disposable asset. And as a result of that disposability, their competitive position is certainly more challenged. It's one reason that 90% of jobs today are more contract-based, are consultant-based, less full-time. Employees are becoming more disposable in some ways because we're becoming more productive. But you want to work in a company that is productive because that does give you some sense of job security. The less productive organizations are certainly ones that are going to see some turmoil in relation to their employees. In relation to data, very similar is to use, or technology is to use data. And we've talked about that, given some examples about that. Data is about using statistics and ratios to quantitatively assess how well an organization does, and then with that data to figure out a way that they can do it better. It's always about better. We use the word efficient and effective, good words, but we also want to use this word about better. No matter how much you research, no matter how much you use technology, in fact, no matter how much you use data, at some point you have to take a chance. You can't be risk tolerant and risk averse your entire professional life. At some point, you have to be a risk champion. Risk averse means I'm not going to take a risk. Risk tolerant says, well, okay, I'll kind of overlook it. Somebody who's a risk champion says, yes, we're going to try it. We are going to try it. Because there was a great statement some years ago that said, fail fast, fix it, and move on. And that's what we have to consider. It's okay to fail, but let's go for it. Let's figure it out, and then let's try to fix it along the way. Very few instances in today's professional world is everything a straight line. Do you start at the bottom and go straight to the top? Usually you have some jagged edges, or it's almost like I look at going upstairs. Stair up, stair up, stair up. So you don't go straight up, you kind of go to the side. And that's indicative of our professional aspirations, but it's also indicative of how organizations work. Productivity, it's very difficult to figure out that one key aspect that's going to raise productivity. But if you have an idea on what may work, then you can kind of adjust it as you go along the way. But you at least have to put something into practice, which is what this last quote states. The dream of something better and the determination to make it come true is what makes the impossible, yes, possible. And I wanted to put that last word in there because we're moving from a world where we want to make the impossible possible. Can that occur? If you go back 100 or 200 years, for the people who were riding a horse, they probably would have never envisioned a train. For those riding a train could have never envisioned a car. For those riding a car could have never envisioned, yes, an airplane. And those riding an airplane could have never envisioned a rocket. Who knows if the rocket is going to become as commonplace as the others, but we certainly know that those riding a horse would have never envisioned a car. So yes, the dream of something better and the determination to make it come true is what makes the impossible possible. With that, everybody, enjoy the day. I always look forward to our next conversations.